Welcome to our first Madrid Energy Conference curtain raiser interview for 2024. My name is Jeremy Martin, Vice President for Energy and Sustainability at the Institute of the Americas. And together with our partners at IPD Latin America, we're delighted to mark the Madrid Energy Conference's 5th anniversary this year on April 9th through 11th in Madrid, Spain. And for our first curtain raiser interview, it's quite fitting that we will feature and host Thiago Barral, who indeed joined us as a speaker when we launched the Madrid Energy Conference in 2019. I'll come back to a more formal introduction of Thiago, but it's so great to have you. Thank you for agreeing to do this interview and discussion.
It's my pleasure, Jeremy. It's a shame I cannot join you in person this time, but this is an amazing event, and I'm pretty sure that we will continue this conversation with the outcomes of this conference.
No, indeed, and I appreciate you helping us look at the discussion points. Indeed, we regret that your very busy work agenda, G20, all of the responsibilities as Secretary of Energy Transition at the Ministry of Mines and Energy. We regret that that's going to impede your joining us in person, but therefore we'll have to get your thoughts here in this interview today. So let me just give the formal presentation quickly of Thiago Barral, who, as I said, is the Secretary of Planning and Energy Transition of the Ministry of Energy and Mines in Brazil. He's held that position since early February 2023. And when we met and had Thiago with us in the Madrid Energy Conference, he was working at the Empresa Pesquisa Energética, the EPE, Brazil's Energy Research Office. He was president of EPE at that point. He had a long career, I think it was around 15 years in various positions at the EPE, and led, of course, to now his appointment in the Federal Ministry of Mines and Energy. He's responsible and the focal point in the ministry for the International Energy Agency, the Clean Energy Ministerial, the Mission Innovation, among a host of other topics, like I already referenced, such as the G20, and of course, cooperation on energy and transition and issues with countries across the world, and particularly in Latin America. All right, Thiago, we know you can't join us, but let's pretend you're giving the opening remarks of your intervention in person in Madrid. So let's start our conversation inviting you to share some key messages from Brazil that you want to make sure are part of the discussion at the Madrid Energy Conference this April.
Well, thank you. So I would start by saying that from last year, the Ministry of Mines and Energy adopted a new structure. And for the first time, we have a secretariat, a department, actually, an office dedicated to not only planning, but more explicitly, energy transition. And so that is a very clear message, political message. And all across the ministries here in Brasilia, energy transition has been at the core of economic policy, of industrial policy, of climate policy, international policy. So it's been an exciting moment but at the same time, challenging moment to integrate all of those perspectives and make sure that the governance for us to implement those policies are really working. On our side here at the Ministry of Mines and Energy, we have built and enhanced the portfolio of energy transition-driven policies. So we have policies towards advancing on biofuels, not only ethanol and biodiesel, including increasing the blending of biofuels and ensuring sustainability assessment, but also new fuels, sustainable fuels such as sustainable aviation fuels, green diesel. We have policies for advancing regulation of carbon capture, decarbonizing the grid. We continue efforts to decarbonize the grid. We have put in place a very ambitious set of mega transmission auctions for enabling integration of more renewables. So there's a lot going on mobility, on electricity, new fuels. So what we are now putting in place is this integration, this integrated perspective, and connecting it to the various other policies, as I said, industrial policy, climate policy. So this is where we are now, making sense of all of these initiatives and ensuring consolidation of this effort?
Well, Brazil's the enormity of the Brazilian market on top of everything you just talked about makes me wish you had more than 24 hours in the day to do your job. I'm sure you do. There's so many issues to talk about, and I appreciate particularly the reference to the industrialization policy. I think I'd like to end with that before we go into that, because that's very nascent and under development. Let's talk about a couple of the things or topics that I believe are most relevant for sort of the energy transition, energy security discussion when we think about the orienting principles and mission of the Madrid Energy Conference, which is really that Latin American, European nexus of energy and energy security, energy climate, and intersection of energy and climate. Hydrogen, that's been a big theme the last couple of years. Let's take that and then maybe we can also get into something like offshore wind, which has been talked about. I think there's some debate around it. I'd be curious to know what's going on in Brazil, because Brazil was touted as one of the opportunity areas for that technology. But first, hydrogen and its associated development, including a lot of those e-fuels you talked about, the derivatives. Obviously, Brazil has a tremendous legacy with sugarcane ethanol as a transport fuel. But now with some of the derivatives of hydrogen and hydrogen per se, what's that mean for Brazil with regards to the European markets?
Well, we established the National Hydrogen Program to integrate efforts across the ministries in terms of policy, because we understand hydrogen requires a successful hydrogen strategy, requires a cross-cutting perspective on capacity building, training, the industrial side of it, also the innovation side of it. So we try to bring all those aspects together and set. And by mid of last year, we established let's say a new strategy for the National Hydrogen Program, with milestones for us to aspirational milestones and concrete actions to achieve that. So we aim at spreading pilots and demonstration plans across the country by 2025, and achieve large-scale hydrogen projects by 2030. So and by 2035, establish hydrogen hubs in the country as a a process of bringing more density to that economy. And in that sense, we figure out that financing projects, and this is a critical moment, because financing the demand for capital is huge, but at the same time, risks are still trying to be resolved in that context, especially not only technology risks, but also demand side risks and supply chain risks. And the other priority in our strategy was to establish certification regulation for that. And so we focused on these two aspects, and the certification discussion, I think, connects Brazil and Europe very strongly, because that's a huge debate. We have advanced in this conversation with the Congress, with the bill, the legal framework for that. It's still under discussion in the Senate, and we look forward to moving ahead. This is a very comprehensive approach that we're bringing to certification, and we believe that this is going to create a stronger dialogue for projects, not only to become part of industrial supply chains for Europe, but also to bring to Brazil part of these supply chains in the steel industry, in fertilizer industry. We are addressing each of these industries to ensure that hydrogen is reaching where it has the most benefit in the first place. The fertilizer industry, for example, is a good example of value for starting the low carbon hydrogen industry here, and we have seen a lot of potential synergies. And just one additional point, there was this big announcement of support from the European Union to a huge hydrogen hub in the northeast of Brazil. And we are supporting that project by planning all the grid infrastructure and any other aspects that require government support for advancing. So many areas for collaboration, huge amount of investment to be untapped. I think this is a promising industry, but I would say still many aspects to be worked on.
No, thank you very much. The questions around certification, that's obviously a huge interface with the EU as well as with other markets like the US. IRA legislation obviously deals a lot with certification. The finance, the risk question, I mean, these are exactly the kinds of things we'll keep discussing, and those will be principal elements of the panels in Madrid. I think a good segue, and we don't have to spend a lot of time, but just some thoughts, because perhaps what's happening with offshore wind is actually also affected by some of these broader macro questions around risk and finance, and just what may or may not be. I know we've seen offshore in the US some issues around advancement of certain offshore wind projects. Just take a minute and talk about offshore wind, because I know it had been touted as something under the new administration in Brazil.
Yeah, so yeah, offshore wind is seen from a energy planning perspective as a new frontier for renewable energy. And the coast of Brazil is very favorable for offshore wind. And so we see that as a new frontier and something that will help us continue advancing in the supply of clean energy to address all the needs of the energy transition. The legal framework under discussion has started in the Senate, now has been also approved in the lower house. Mm-hmm. We had a very active conversation, and we think the text is very balanced. It has had the support of many stakeholders across the industry. But now, when it came back to the Senate, there are some aspects not related to offshore wind regulatory framework itself that are causing some delays in the discussion. So aspects that are not related to offshore wind, to the aspects of offshore wind, but they're causing some delay. Meanwhile, we have seen many companies starting processes of permitting of their projects in Brazil, but and on our side, from a government side, we are mobilizing different agencies that need to move in sync, so that we can not only for the approval of the legal framework, but also the implementation of that once it's approved. I believe that it will take at least 12 to 18 months after the legal framework is approved before we can have a leasing process, the first leasing process, because many agencies that need to be involved. So the sooner we start that work, I think we can shorten that period and provide a faster response to all those investors willing to step into that industry.
But it's interesting you mentioned, so the sort of offshore leasing round, if you will, for this is contemplated as part of this integrated process.
Yes, absolutely. It's one of the core, because that's when we will provide the long-term perspective for those investing in wind measurements and all the analysis and project development that is not cheap to do.
And if I'm not mistaken, the most recent Petrobras strategic plan and financial plan includes a fairly significant amount of capital that's allocated to offshore wind, right?
Yes, Petrobras is one of the leading companies willing to invest in that industry, and has also partnered with other companies. But there is a wide variety of players interested in that. And we see with very good, as a very good, a promising opportunity when we have solid players like Petrobras and others willing to invest, interested. That's a good signal, and that is additional, let's say, additional energy that we should put into having this legal framework and implementation done.
Of course, the legal and market certainty, the regulatory environment, as you know so well, very key. No, fascinating, and we could go on forever, but we need to wrap up. I know you, like we've talked about, have a busy agenda. Let me wrap up. I said I wanted to come back to industrialization, industrial policy. It's a hot new topic the last couple of years. We heard a lot about it in the State of the Union here in the United States last night. President taking a little bit of a victory lap on some of the IRA and bipartisan infrastructure. President Lula unveiled Brazil's industrialization strategy known as the New Industry Brazil. Just what can you share about that, understanding that's very recently emerging and it's nascent? But anyway, wrap up and with some comments on the industrialization policy.
Yeah, so that's a very interesting topic. Of course, we won't have time to cover it in much detail, but I think some important aspects. First of all, globally, industrial policies have been announced and implemented, and this is a way Brazil is attempting to respond to the opportunities, but also the competition that these industrial policies have brought to globally speaking. We don't have as much, let's say, budget to have a huge amount of subsidies like other regions in the world have. So we have to be creative and try to ensure that we are being effective in the way we allocate either tax incentives or direct subsidies in that. And the new industrial policy has been built based on it's a mission-oriented industrial policy. And the important thing is that one of these 6 missions driving this new industrial policy is decarbonization, energy transition, and bioeconomy. So what we did was to assess what would be the more specific goals of these mission, the targets and the goals, let's say, and how and the instruments. So BNDES, the National Development Bank, has stepped in as a very important stakeholder in this industry, offering special financing conditions for those investments related to that industrial policy. Another aspect is that the National Fund for Science and Technology and Innovation has also adopted these goals and objectives of the new industrial policy as a way to prioritize allocation of funds for innovation and R&D in that sense. But we are now going into more detail, so because we need to still work some of these instruments of the policy, and so that we can finalize with all this connectivity of the different instruments there. So I would say it's still under construction, but the main guidelines have been set and are giving a clear sign of areas, and energy transition is at the core of this new industrial policy.
No, I think it's thank you very much for sharing that, the way it's being oriented, and I think it's very clear. Obviously it goes without saying, in Brazil, the questions around the Amazon and the climate and the interface with Amazon climate and deforestation and all of these questions are so massive. And I think, like you say, the sort of nature-based elements of the industrialization will be certainly fascinating. Maybe not directly under your purview, but there's plenty that is, like you say, about energy transition. We'll need to leave it there. I don't want to abuse too much more of your time. Thank you so much, Thiago Barral, the Secretary of Energy Transition and Planning at the Ministry of Mines and Energy in Brazil. We are going to have somebody else from your old EPE from the Empresa Pesquisa Energética joining us in Madrid, Eloisa
Yes.
Borges. So we will have some great material now to make sure that Eloisa follows up. And as we say in English, dots the I's and crosses the T. So thank you again, Madrid Energy Conference, April 9th through 11th. This has been a wonderful discussion. Thank you, Thiago.
Thank you so much, and I wish you a very successful Madrid Energy Conference.
We'll see you in the 6th annual.